This is Karen with DoClevelandRadio.net, and it is time for Avoid the Maze. And we are all walking through a maze of life. I don't care how much you plan. In fact, I had a great plan this morning. I had a doctor appointment, and I knew that doctor appointment was going to last me all of 20 minutes, and instead it lasted 2 hours. And my day got totally thrown off. And I kept looking at my watch, Danny, because I knew I had to be back in the studio for today's podcast. And so when I planned the doctor appointment and planned the podcast time, I knew I had that window of opportunity. But I was starting to sweat bullets at the doctor's office because he was just taking his good old time. He was not in a hurry. But as it turned out, I still had plenty of time to get home, have my coffee, and prepare for today. And our guest today is, I hope I say it right, Danny, Bracell.
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 Mm-hmm.
And looking at Dan with that wonderful bookcase behind him, I wish I could read all the names of the books. He obviously knew exactly who he wanted to be when he was a little boy, playing with either soldiers or trucks or some sort of toy. And I'm sure that's who you are today, right, Danny?
Yeah, actually, Karen, it didn't work out that way. I actually grew up hating reading. My father was a librarian. I always hated the public library. There was always, it always smelled funny. There was always uncomfortable furniture. There was always some elderly woman telling me to be quiet. There's always some freaky homeless guy thinks he's a vampire hanging out at the public library. I always hated it. And it was ironic because it wasn't until I eventually, as an adult, started teaching in the inner city where all of a sudden I noticed that a lot of my students didn't have the resources I had available to me as a child. And I said, shame on me. I mean, I was blessed, Karen. I had both parents in my home. We weren't wealthy, but we always had food on the table. Right. My parents read in front of us. They read to us. We always had plenty of reading materials around us. And I realized not everybody gets that. And, what I love about your show is I love looking at the hiccups in life. I think all of us have hiccups. And that's why Rocky is such a wonderful movie. It's not that Rocky keeps on getting punched in the face and hitting the mat. But what's great about Rocky is he keeps on getting back up. And it's in the Bible that you fall down 7 times, you get up 8.
But it's interesting because I know when I was growing up, we were told to get back up, but we were told not to fail. I mean, I heard that my whole life, do not fail, do not fail. And, it used to scare me because I wasn't the best student. I didn't fail, but I struggled. And I struggled because I have a totally different way of learning than the public schools were teaching me back in the 60s. You can't tell me just to go read a chapter and absorb it and then be able to spit the information back out. But if we talk about what I'm reading and we put it into a sense of life that I can recognize, not only am I going to be able to spit it back out, but I'm going to be able then to go research it even more because now I'm interested. So, I had the books just like you. I went to the library, didn't realize all the advantages that I had until I started podcasting and realized how different all of our lives have been, but yet we all have a common denominator. And that is we all want to be successful.
Yeah, and that's what my definition of happiness is: always progress. How do we get better every single day? And you're my dream student, Karen. It's my favorite thing. I love figuring out what turns people on, and trying to establish a curricula based on individual needs. It was either the the Harvard professor Howard Gardner or the important educational philosopher of the late 1970s, Gary Coleman, who once said, different strokes for different folks. Everybody's different.
Absolutely.
And, Samuel Beckett that said, ever tried, ever failed, no worries, fail again, fail better. I point out in one of my speeches at leadership conferences, I say, one of the things I emphasize to kids, I'm like, well, what's the opposite of success? And executives always say failure. I'm like, no, it's not. In order to succeed, you need to fail a lot. The opposite of success is not trying or quitting. A lot of people remember that Babe Ruth hit 60 home runs in a single season, an amazing feat, a record that stood over 30 years in Major League Baseball. What most people fail to remember is that he also led the league in strikeouts the same year with 89. I, for one, want my students swinging for the fences all the time. And so I just admire what you're doing. We need so much more positivity in the world and people realizing that you're not alone. Nobody succeeds without falling on their face multiple times.
And, I've met with a number of people who want to do podcasting, and they'll say to me, I need to take my time. I need to put it together. I need to wait till next month, next year. And I look at them and go, while you're waiting, what are you doing? Because if you take those baby steps now, so what if it's not the perfect podcast? What if you're not the best teacher the first day you walk into the classroom? What if you decide to leave one occupation and go to another? If you do it, that's the first step towards success. That's not failure. And, I started this 8 years ago, and I had no idea what I was doing. I just knew that I was a communications major. It's what I wanted to do. And I said, you know what? I'm just going to do it. And then I'm going to learn from my mistakes. I'm going to learn from other people. And, it's been a fun ride because I continue to grow. And I don't care what age you are. We keep growing until they put us 6 feet under. So I'm going to keep growing. So when I look at your little bit of bio, and you also mentioned it, that you taught in the inner city. So tell us, how did you even get to teaching?
Yeah, so it's ironic, Karen. I was a journalist in Washington, D.C. I had the greatest job in the world. I got to meet every editor of every major newspaper, and they were all offering me jobs. And a major daily offered me a job doing the city beat for $16,500 a year. And then a friend told me, oh, they need teachers in the inner city in South Central Los Angeles for $25,200 a year. So I always tell people, I became a teacher for the noblest of reasons, for the high pay.
I love it. I love it.
And it turned out to be a real blessing.
And probably half of that you had to put into your supplies and everything else. Oh, yeah. But we won't go there. So you had this very specialized job in Washington. I mean, you were rubbing shoulders with all the top level people. Why would, even for the money, why would you want to leave that? Because a lot of people would say, no, no, no.
Well, I think that's a great question, Karen. I'm actually really enjoying this interview. This is different than I usually do. So when I was a journalist, I became a journalist because I wanted to be the next Charles Kuralt. I wanted to drive around America and meet all these quirky people and highlight them and just kind of remind everybody how awesome this country is. And it turned out they put me on a political beat where I was covering politicians, and a politician said something at a press conference, which was pretty meaningless. And I wrote my lead, and I saw the 6 leads my colleagues had written, and I'm like, but he didn't say anything. And I was like, I don't like this. You're just trying to go after the negative. And I mean, I understand there's no objectivity. All of us bring our own experiences to whatever we're doing, but I do believe in fairness, and I just didn't want to be around that, Karen. And so, and it was just amazing as a teacher, just being able to look into students. And I always want the students, I kind of like to be Ellis Island, except the huddled masses that nobody else wants. that everybody else has given up on. And I always tell my kids, I'm like, you know, sometimes you need somebody else to believe in you before you believe in yourself. I'm like, I believe in all of you. They only give me the best and the brightest. So let's go out and change the world. And it's so positive. And now it's even better because now I'm not a teacher. Now I train teachers and I speak to audiences around the world. I mean, when you're the teacher, you play mom. Now my role is auntie or uncle. Auntie or uncle is great because you get to pump them up and then leave. You know, mom has to set some ground rules and things like that. So it's a real blessing. And I always, and that's what I love about your show is you're just encouraging people, try lots of different things. I mean, I'm kind of a believer in throwing spaghetti at the wall. You never know what's going to stick, and you never know what your true passion actually might want to be. I mean, I have a photo of me, Karen, when I was 4 years old, wearing space boots, a San Diego Charger jersey, a sheriff's badge, and a fireman's helmet.
I love it.
I was going to be the first ever astronaut, professional football player, police officer, and firefighter. But the blessing in that, Karen, was that's the world I grew up in. I grew up in a world with really supportive parents who they didn't really care what us three kids, my brother, sister, and me, they didn't care what we did. They just cared about us always doing the best at whatever we tried.
Exactly.
And it was a wonderful lesson, wonderful modeling.
Well, you know, it's interesting because that's how we were brought up as well. I remember my oldest brother struggled in high school and when he first went to college. And my parents said, it's okay that you're struggling. Just keep going. And eventually he ended up with his PhD. And he wanted to be
stories. I love stories like that.
And, you know, my parents sort of like looked at him like, how did you struggle? You know, you couldn't even add 1 + 1. And now, you know, you have your PhD. And his comment was, I wasn't ready to learn. And I didn't understand that until I went back to school in my late 50s and said, you know what? I'm going to complete my degree. I'm going to get my master's because I want to prove I can do it. Not for my parents, okay? Not necessarily for any specific job. Can I do this? And I loved going back to school. Whereas when I think about my teenage years in school, I hated it. You know, I didn't care what the class was or what the socialization was. It didn't speak to me. But years later, college did because I put it into perspective of what I wanted to learn and how I wanted to use what I got out of that. And that's what it sounds like you also did. You wore all these different hats. You're going to figure out which one really fit. And even though it might fit today, you know what? You're looking ahead because there may be something different that's going to fit tomorrow.
Absolutely. I mean, I used to show a slide in one of my presentations and I blocked out the faces. It was 3 gentlemen. I said, well, let me tell you the story of these 3 gentlemen. The guy on the left had a D- grade point average in high school. He couldn't get admitted to a university. So he went to City College in New York, where he boosted his grades to a C- average, taking mostly physical education courses. But he was ROTC. He went into the Army for 20 years. And then in his 40s, he went for his master's and got straight A's. I'm like, now, fortunately, former Secretary of State Colin Powell wasn't judged on how he did in high school. I'm like, now the guy on the right has a very interesting distinction. He's the only person to have ever been kicked out of Yale twice. I mean, he got accepted into Yale, went there for 6 months, got kicked out for bad grades, went back home, fell in love with a girl. Well, the girl's family would not let her date somebody that wasn't going to college. So he used his family connections to get readmitted to Yale, where he promptly failed out again. So he went to that bastion of higher education, Casper Community College, where he took an interest in political science. He transferred to the University of Wyoming, graduated with straight A's. I'm like, fortunately, former Vice President Dick Cheney wasn't judged on the way he did at Yale. I'm like, now the guy in the center of the picture, I'd like to tell you how he did in school, but the moment he ran for governor of Texas, they sealed all of his transcripts from kindergarten on. Let me just tell you, they don't usually seal transcripts because you're a straight A student. I'm like, that's former President George W. Bush. And I'm like, this isn't political because I have no interest in politics. I believe in solving problems, not creating problems. And the discourse in this country right now is ridiculous. We need to remember we're not Republicans and Democrats, we're
Right. We are
Americans.
people.
Let's get stuff accomplished. But it's not a political statement. Under anybody's criteria, these are three highly successful individuals. Thank goodness their lives weren't determined based on how they did in a public education system, like you already said, Karen, which is designed for a certain type of student. And that's great. It works for certain types of students, but it's not the end all be all. It's not how you start, it's how you finish. I mean, when I was a kindergarten teacher, I used to look at my little ones. I'm like, I hope to God this isn't the best year of your life. I mean, I hope it's next year and the year after that.
Right.
I mean, I played high school football with guys that still talk about when we played high school football together. But man, the windshield's a lot bigger than the rear view mirror, folks. If again, I think happiness is progress. You should constantly be challenged. I mean, I love it that in your 50s, you decide to go for your master's to prove it to yourself. I mean, and everybody has that, whether it's going for a degree or running a marathon or, serving in their church. I mean, these are the types of challenges people grow with. I mean, when you stop growing, then you're starting to die.
Exactly. And, it's interesting because the big thing going on behind the political scenes is ageism. And we live in a society where we think, if you don't learn early on and you don't make those plans early on, then once you hit 20 or 30, you may be too old. And I've heard this over and over again. And I have a 31-year-old son who his life really thrives on sports. And he's always wanted to be somewhere in the sports arena. And he's been struggling. He's working with a team right now. And, some people say, but you're too old. And it's like, no, I'm not too old because I've proven myself. I'm growing. And you know what? When I wake up in the morning, I'm the happiest I can be. And to me, that's growth because he looks at all sides of the business from where he sits. And he really taught me that, just because I was 50, if I always wanted to be in broadcasting, why aren't I? And I remember when my mother was ill and dying, I was doing a podcast in the other room and I came into her room to tell her I was done. And she said, "Are you a famous broadcaster?" And my answer was, yes, I am. Because for myself, I was famous. 3 years prior to that, I wasn't doing it. I was dreaming about it. But once I took that step, it was like, I'm getting the success that I need. And that can change day to day. But when I listen to you talk about education, there aren't enough people out there like you who seem to want to identify that education is not cookie cutter. How do we make those changes in this world? Because I see so many students who struggle, not just myself.
I was blessed, Karen. When I first started teaching at the elementary school, I was the only man at my school. I was the only white person at my school. I taught with predominantly elderly African-American women from the South who all had been teaching for at least 20 years. And my mentor was Mrs. Turner. Mrs. Turner had been teaching for 40 years. Mrs. Turner was from Alabama. She believed in two things, discipline and the Bible. When her little ones got out of line, she started reading aloud Revelations to them. She was just incredible. And I had a principal at the time, we'll call him Voldemort. And he would come into my classroom and insult me in front of the students, and it would totally bring me down. But I was blessed to have my guardian angel. It was Mrs. Turner who took me under her wing, and she said, "You're not going to last long. You let that negative energy affect you. Next time negative energy comes in this room, you do as I do." She'd go, "Oh, then you shut the door and do it your way." She's like, "Miss Basale, I've been teaching here for 40 years. They've had 35 different reading programs. I got one, mine, and it works." And, it sounds simplistic. It'd be great if we had, it always cracks me up when policymakers deem all these standardized tests necessary for students when most of these politicians would never pass those tests on their own. And the money that we spend on testing, which is almost $5 billion a year in this country, we could reinvest that money and hire PE teachers and music teachers and art teachers. We could have field trips again. We could have school counselors. So it's not one school counselor per 800 kids. We'd be able to identify kids with social and emotional learning difficulties and figure out ways to meet the needs of those students. And so I'm doing my part. You know, I find that schools do an adequate job of teaching kids how to read. But my question has always been, what good is it teaching kids how to read if they never want to read? I teach kids why to read because I've never had to tell a kid, go watch TV. I've never had to tell a kid, go play a video game. And I never want to have to tell a kid, go read. I want them to do it because they love to do it. And then that's my specialty is I created the world's top reading engagement program that teaches parents in just a couple of months how to get their kid to read more, read better, and most importantly, love reading. I want people to love school. I always tell teachers, I'm like, you know, if you're doing your job, your kid should be banging on your classroom door at 5 in the morning, and they should be in tears when they hear that final bell. I mean, it should be an interactive Disneyland. And I don't understand what's going on in this country. My kindergartners, Karen, used to go to bed with their backpacks on because they were so excited to go to school the next day. My 8th graders were thinking of ways to get sick. I'm like, what happened in those 8 years to get that kid to hate school so much? We need to reevaluate a whole lot. And I mean, I look at the research and I've never seen a person that a standardized test could tell you how they were going to do when they were 50 years old. I mean, there's plenty of people that bomb those things. And again, it's not how, I mean, it's not how you start. You look at these books behind me, I love reading biographies. And there's one thing that's almost consistent in almost every biography of a successful person. They dropped out of school. I'm like, what does that tell us about the school system? I mean, we need to do a better job. I mean, how much better could these people be if we figured out at a young age, hey, this kid's good at this, you know, we need to encourage this, you know, listening to your son. I mean, at least he has a positive attitude. How many people, you know, he had you supporting him. How many people don't get that support system? How many people do we lose because they never had a person say, you know what? You like communications? Maybe you should start broadcast. Maybe you should just jump out and do the podcast, Karen. I mean, all of us need somebody like that to encourage us. And so that's my passion in life, is encouraging those people that don't feel like they can do it to realize that, you know, nobody thinks they can do it at the beginning.
Well,
I mean,
and you know, that is, you've hit it on the nail on the head. I have a woman who is extremely successful. She's been successful in TV, in writing, in producing, and she's been around for a long time. She has 2 or 3 degrees, and we've been talking about her starting a podcast. She doesn't have enough faith in herself. And I'm sitting on this end going, you're like everything I ever thought I wanted to be. But now I'm so great that I'm not like that, because I'm not afraid of like jumping in and saying, let me see if it works. And so we assume that based on the hats you wear, that you've got it all.
mm-hmm.
And the reality of it is that sometimes that's not true. We have, my husband and I have another friend who is so educated, it's unbelievable. I mean, he should be on Jeopardy because he probably has every answer. But the simple things in life, he just doesn't get. We were supposed to have an ice storm yesterday, and he lives on the opposite side of town than us. He wanted to come over here and drop something off. And my husband said, are you looking at the weather report? He said, I don't need you getting stuck. And he goes, oh, it's just a little bit of ice. And it's like, it's a little bit of ice until it becomes a storm. Right. You know, so, you know, there's a way to take all that book learning and let's put it into practical use. And that's what it sounds like you've done. and you did it with your kindergartners, but then you, like you said, from 1st to 8th grade, depending on who their teacher was, depending on their support system, they may have lost all that excitement for learning.
Yeah.
Because, and I can go back and look at my teachers through school, and I can tell you exactly when I did really well and when I didn't. We had one teacher in elementary school. I think she wore the same black dress every single day. She looked older than my grandmother. And she spoke in a very, very demanding voice. And I was terrified of her. And I was lucky that I made C's in that class, because that's how terrified. I just couldn't grasp what I was doing. And I look back to the next year, and I had a teacher by the name of Mrs. Sherman. And Mrs. Sherman, she kept candy in her drawer. And if you made an attempt to give the right answer, even if it was wrong, if you made an attempt, you got a piece of candy.
Good for her. You should always praise the risk taker.
And so it was like my grades went up. And I remember my mother saying, "What are you doing different? Are you studying more?" And I said, "No, I'm enjoying it more." And that was the difference. And that's what I saw too when I went to college initially. Wasn't enjoying it. When I went back to college, I enjoyed it. So, for those listening, if you have kids in school, you got to try to help them figure out, what excites them. And I know you're going to tell me it's video games, but there's learning in video games as well. So there's a way of cross-referencing all that. So you mentioned your dad was a librarian, right?
Yep.
So as a librarian, did you guys have to sit down and read so many books a week or month?
No, I was really blessed, Karen. My parents never forced us to do anything, but they modeled it. They were always reading. When I was growing up, people used to ask my mom why she didn't have a dishwasher. And she's like, "Oh, I got 3, Danny, Jim, and Liz." And while we were washing and drying dishes, she would always read to us. And she taught me something really important. You don't need a PhD to be a really good parent. There's basic tricks of the trade. You do those things. And so that's what I try to, it was either Socrates or Keanu Reeves who once said, "You're licensed to fish, or licensed to drive a car, but any idiot can become a parent." Well, now that I'm a parent, that's been proven true. But in defense of parents, nobody gives them a manual at the hospital. And there's little strategies I know that'll work that I give. Here's a quick one I give to parents all the time. I have a feeling television is here to stay, Karen. I don't believe in making it adversarial because I know it's here. My 3 kids love watching TV. So there's a couple of tricks that I've done. First of all, they know they can watch TV, but the price of admission is they have to bring me something to read. So before they're allowed to turn on that TV, when they were little, they'd bring me children's picture books and we'd read that book and then they could turn on the TV. Now that they're older, they'll bring me like a newspaper article or a magazine article. It might be on their iPad now, but we'll read that before the TV goes on. Plus, President Bush Sr. 30 years ago signed a very important law in this country that says every television set in America has to have closed captioning. So one of the first tricks I teach parents is turn on the closed captioning. And people will say, "Well, wait a sec, if the show's in English and the subtitles are in English, what good does that do?" I'm like, "Well, that's a fair point. Let me make a point. Have you ever watched a show with subtitles and not looked at the subtitles? It's very difficult to do. Your brain is directed towards that text. There's actually research that supports this. If you look at reading scores around the world, the more kids watch TV, the lower their reading scores are in every single country of the world except for one. The country that watches the most TV in the world has the highest reading scores in the world. It's Finland. And so people ask me, "Well, how can that be?" I'm like, "Well, because Finland makes really bad TV shows." And so what they do is they import all these old American sitcoms like Happy Days and Welcome Back, Kotter and Brady Bunch, and they have to subtitle them. The kids are constantly reading. It's an easy trick for parents. Just turn on the closed captioning. Again, it's not easy being a parent, especially now.
Right.
I mean, the pandemic forced millions of parents across this country to involuntarily homeschool their kids. And now I hope more people understand and appreciate the complexity of being a classroom teacher. I mean, if you can't handle your own kids, think about having 33 different kids in a class, and they're all different Karens. They all have different things that turn them on, and figuring out, well, I mean, it's like going to a fuel pump. You know, we don't have just 87, 89, 91 octane. You got 33 different types of octane. You got to figure out what's the exact fuel that fuels this kid. And that's, to me, to a lot of people, that's the drudgery of teaching. To me, it's the excitement of teaching, because I like the fact that everybody's different. The reason we survived the pandemic is because we were all different.
Right.
If we were all the same, we would have been wiped out. But we're different. We should be embracing that and be excited about that. I mean, you know, I'm a football fan. I was watching football games yesterday. I mean, you know, the quarterback doesn't have the same skill set as the kicker, and the kicker doesn't have the same skill set as the defensive end. You know, I used to ask my kids, I'm like, what's more important, your arms or your legs? And they'd sit there stumped. I'm like, here's a hint. They're both important. So don't freak out. I mean, some of us are brilliant at math. You know, your friend that's book smart can probably recite poetry from memory, but doesn't know how to read the weather map and figure out that maybe I shouldn't drive in icy weather. I mean, but that's great. All of us are a little bit, I mean, my wife and I are complete. This is actually the discussion I want in this country. I'm like, hey, folks, we need to learn how to be able to disagree without being disagreeable. You know, all of us have different opinions. We all bring different things to the table. We need to learn how to love and respect one another. We can disagree. That's fine. But I'm interested in solving problems. I'm not interested in people. This is where, when you were talking about people putting on their best face, this is the problem with social media that I see, is everybody's always made up. Oh, I'm in Tahiti with the family, you know, I just got my PhD in Tahiti, you know, and you're sitting there stuck in Ohio and it's like 20 below zero and your kids are screaming and you made them an unhealthy dinner and you put them in front of the TV and you're feeling guilty. I'm like, but that's life. Social media is not reality. People put the nice stuff on. They don't show pictures of them right after they wake up and their hair's all screwed. I mean, my hair, I don't know if it's screwed up right now, but every time I wake up, it's like this, I look like alfalfa. And I'm like, how the heck do I always have this one piece of hair that stands up? We need to show people our imperfections. That's what I love about this podcast. You're showing people that everybody's human. You know, everybody has issues. They're different issues, but everybody has them. And the thing that I love about you, Karen, is you took action. Whether I was teaching my little ones or my older ones, they always have to listen to the same refrain as they exit my classroom every day. I always tell them, remember, kids, education is valuable, but execution is priceless. Knowledge is not power. Only applied knowledge is power. Knowing what the right thing to do and doing the right thing are two very different things. So go out, do the right thing, and make this world a better place. Simple things that we can all do.
And, you know, as much as we're different, we have so many commonalities. And that's one of the reasons why I created Avoid the Maze, because I wanted people to see that I may be taking the path to the left. You may be going straight ahead, but there are certain things that we do agree on, that we both like, and we just are making our choices a little bit different. It could be based on the way we were raised. It could be based on where we're living at the time, our financial situation. So many things can alter that, but it doesn't mean that we don't have things in common. And when I listen to some of these podcasts where people are arguing all the time, you know, I'm right, you're wrong. It's like, why are you right and I'm wrong? Okay. And I used to say this to my husband. When can I say I'm right? And my husband said, you don't have to. And I started to agree with him. I don't have to. If I have to fight with somebody to say, I'm right, you're wrong, then becomes adversarial. I don't want it that way.
You have a better relationship than my wife and I. The agreement used to be that I was always right and she always got her way. But then once we have the kids, now she's always right and she gets her way. It seems to work for us.
Well, my husband is always telling me that I'm proving him wrong. And I'll say to him, no, I'm not proving you wrong. I'm just giving you my side of the story. So,
Mm,
hey, however that works. But for our listeners, the reality of it is that we all come into this world basically the same way.
mm,
Okay. Some of us have a few more advantages than others, but even when you're born with advantages doesn't mean that you're going to continue to have them throughout the rest of your life. And
mhm.
I've seen people who have been born into very wealthy families with great parents and whatever, and their life falls apart. It's up to us to make those choices.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have friends that went to Ivy League schools that like to brag to me that that was the last book they read was in college. And I'm like, well, that's stupid. Whereas I have other friends that dropped out of high school that read voraciously, and they're much more interesting people as adults. So, I mean, I, I, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, again, if the best times of your, I mean, I was speaking at an event and a woman was introduced as she was Miss America like in 1973, and I'm like, it's 2022 and you're still telling people you were Miss America in 19, that's like me saying, oh, I won the spelling bee in fourth grade. I mean, come on, like
Yeah.
let's
Well,
I don't know, but I laugh at all this stuff. Everybody's a little bit different.
well, so how are we going to look at Tom Brady in the future? Is he going to
Mm,
say, he, was the best of the best and won all these awards, or is he going to go on and do other things? And that's what people need to look at. You're only as good as they say that an actor or actress is only as good as the last movie they were in. So if the last movie they were in wasn't very good, they're not considered very good. Okay.
yeah.
And so we always want to be looking at doing something a little bit better,
Mm,
but it's not necessarily being judged by each other. We have to judge ourselves. Okay. If I feel that I'm better today than I was yesterday, I've succeeded. It doesn't make any difference what anybody else thinks. Because if I don't think well enough of myself, I'm not going to see the good in other people.
mm.
So we got to start feeling good about ourselves.
Well, we have to understand that everybody makes mistakes. That's really, when I'm reading aloud stories to kids, I'm always reading about people that failed. All of us fail. I mean, it's what you do with your failure. One of the examples I give to people was Chuck Colson was an advisor to President Nixon, and he was put in prison for his involvement in Watergate. Well, is he going to be defined as being an advisor to the president, or is he going to be defined as a prisoner? Well, while he was in prison, he started a fellowship, a Christian fellowship. He found God and started getting prisoners to read the Bible. And what an amazing thing. He created this incredible program that gave a lot of hope and faith to a lot of incarcerated people. So that's a person that's taken their lemons and turning it into lemonade. I mean, what do you do with it? There's nothing better to me than seeing, you look at Mary Kay Ash. She's like one of the most amazing people ever to walk the face of the planet, as
Right.
far as I'm concerned. I mean, she loses her husband. She's trying to raise her kids. She starts a company. And not only does she start a company, she starts a company that empowers women, and it gives them not just financial security, but makes them feel better about themselves. I mean, gosh, if I could be half the person Mary Kay Ash was, I would feel like I had actually done my job on this planet. All of us are put here for a reason. Are we living our purpose every day? And so that's what I hope your listeners are getting out of this show is, hey, I've been fearing trying this, but there's the book I'm writing right now. I talk about these two women are talking in a diner. They were both choreographers, Martha and Agnes. And Agnes, she had just opened up her third play on Broadway, and fans seemed to like it, but the critics hated it and they were just panning it. And so she's like, I'm just going to close it down. And Martha's like, you can't close it down. You've never been on this planet before. There's never been you. There's not going to be another you. There's just you. And it's not the you to determine what's good and bad, but if you put this away, the world will never have this play. And so Agnes took her advice. Now, Martha was Martha Graham, who wound up winning the Presidential Medal of
Right.
Freedom, and she was Kennedy Center Honors. She's considered the founder of modern dance. And Agnes was Agnes DeMille, who became the first woman to ever have 3 hits on Broadway at the same time. And that show that she decided not to close, she just changed the title of the show to Oklahoma. It's a great story in, I have another story where it's this guy and he's writing his buddy Giuseppe. He's like, man, my back is sore. I feel miserable. My ass is hurting. He's like just bitching the whole letter. And he's like, alas, Giuseppe, I am not a painter. I am a sculptor. And the letter's signed Michelangelo right after he'd finished completion of the Sistine Chapel.
Wow. And again, it's finding that inner strength. And I know we all have it. Sometimes we're afraid to let it out. And I tell people through all of our shows that probably for the first 55 years of my life was based on making everybody else happy, because that's what I learned. Okay. I remember, as I'm the youngest of 3 kids, I have 2 older brothers, and my mother used to say, your brothers are going to tease you. They're going to pull your hair. They're going to do all those things. But someday they're really going to learn to love you, because they're going to bring their friends home and you're going to make them hot chocolate. I never understood why at 4 or 5 years old, she was telling me I was going to make hot chocolate, but she did. But it started to make sense as I got older, that my brothers started to respect me as I got older, once I could find my voice. But for so long, I was afraid to bring it out because they were my 2 older brothers. So I felt I had to take a back seat. And like I said, it was in my 50s. Don't know exactly what happened, but we were all together for a family event. And my brothers were having a conversation, and I just interjected. And they sat back and they listened to me. And it was like, wow, where have I been my whole life?
Wow.
And they didn't realize that I had taken that back seat. But once I jumped into the conversation, it's now they say, hey, we can't shut her up, but that's okay. I had to find that inner strength, that I wasn't just the baby of the family. I didn't just have to make everybody else happy. And if I rubbed somebody wrong, I knew how to say I was sorry. And people have rubbed me wrong, I've forgiven them. So, it goes back to that, we have to come together. If we don't start coming together in our society, I don't know what we're going to leave behind for the future.
What a gift that you learned that. I'm so happy you figured that out. You can either look at, well, it took me 55 years to learn it, or you can look at it as, hey, you still got a lot of time left on this rock, and spread your joy. I love it.
And I do another podcast with one of my podcasters. She's 85 years old. It's called The Rant, and it's about ageism. And she's been pushing, we have to stop with ageism. We have to be fair, whether you're 20, 80, 100. If you have something to offer, which we all do, offer it up, be part of the community. And I finally had to say to her a couple weeks ago, we can't be angry. We can call it The Rant, but we can't be angry anymore, because I think the message is loud and clear. But if we let people know that, look what you're doing at 85, you're still writing books, you're writing poetry, you're painting, you're teaching an online class. Guess what? You're the face of ageism. And I want our 20-year-olds to also know you're not too young to do what you want to do. If you don't start doing it, what are you going to wait for? And to say that I waited almost 55 years to find my voice, but I found it, like you said. And the difference it makes, waking up in the morning knowing that, you know what, I have purpose. And I want everybody to have purpose each day when they wake up.
That's a great thing about anybody can gripe. That's really easy. People can gripe. That's what Twitter's for. The people that get compensated and rewarded in life are the people that actually do something about it, and you've actually done something about it. So your podcast can be the rant, and then maybe like the last 10 minutes is the answer, but anybody can gripe. I mean, heck, I'll just go on social media if I want to be put in a foul mood. That's why I stopped watching the news. It's always about, there was a great quote by President Ford when he was president. He let it slip one day that he always started his day by reading the sports page. And the media freaked out. They're like, "You're the leader of the free world. How do you start your day off with the sports page?" And he said, "Well, the sports page celebrates man's achievements. The front page just shows all of his failures." I'm like, there's actually a lot of truth to that statement.
Absolutely.
So you want to surround yourself. One of my mentors, Charlie Tremendous Jones, said, "You're the same today as you will be in 5 years, except for two things: the people you meet and the books you read." So I always tell my kids, make sure you make wise choices and surround yourself with people that lift you up, and make sure you fill your mind with books that are positive.
I love it. Well, how can our listeners find you, Danny?
Well, as a thank you, Karen, I wanted to thank you for having me, and thank all your listeners for bearing with me. If you go to freegiftfromdanny.com, again, freegiftfromdanny.com, I'm going to give everybody a complimentary e-copy of my book, Read, Lead, and Succeed. It's a book, I wrote it for a school principal who was trying to keep his faculty positively engaged. So I said, okay, I'll write you a book. So every week I give you a concept, an inspirational quote, an inspirational story, a book recommendation on a book you should read, but you're probably too lazy because you're an adult. So I also give you a children's picture book recommendation that demonstrates the same concept. You can read that in 5 minutes. And then I'm also going to give everybody access to a 1 week, a 5-day reading challenge I did this past summer with about 700 parents around the world, where every day for an hour, I flood you with all kinds of ideas on how to get your kids excited about reading. Because the more excited you are to read, the more likely you are to read, and the more you read, the better you get. And basically, it's a big promo for my reading engagement program. I get really excited about this, and it's just fascinating. It took you to 55 to find your voice. It took me until my 30s before I realized that reading is really something that's important in not just my life, but everybody's life. And but better later than never. Better late than never.
Well, and I loved your comment about closed caption, because I am not a good sleeper. So I usually wake up very early in the morning and I go downstairs, and I don't want to disturb the rest of the family. And I've been using closed caption. And I'm going to tell our listeners that I get more out of whatever I'm watching, whether it's a Netflix movie, the news, whatever, because not only do I hear part of it, but I'm reading it, and if it doesn't come through clearly, because sometimes the text is not really correct. Sometimes I will then just go to my computer and Google it, because, hey, I've missed something, because I was concentrating too much on the text that was wrong. I didn't really hear it. But then once I Google it, I have to read it again. So I think, it does make a difference. It keeps us on our toes. And, I just absorb more that way. So
yeah, I mean, it's important. Sometimes you miss something. I mean, there's that old joke about the Catholic priest goes back into the catacombs of St. Peter's Cathedral, and it turns out they missed the word. It said celebrate. Don't be celibate. Celebrate. For 800 years we messed up on it. It's a bad joke, but it cracks me up, because a lot of times even when I'm speaking to audiences, I'm like, what I say and what you hear aren't always exactly the same thing. So it's important that I love that point, Karen. You actually pick up a lot sometimes by reading the text.
yeah, I tell my husband he should use closed caption when he's talking to me, because we're going to be married 38 years, and sometimes it's just sound. But if he would hold up a card, I might know exactly what he wants me to know. So
congratulations on 38 years. That should be the new. I always tell people, people that like to complain about society, I'm like, it's all of our faults. We need to start being the solution, not the problem. I mean, if you're griping about kids being punks on the football field, maybe ESPN should stop highlighting the idiot in the end zone doing his dance and start highlighting the lineman helping the other lineman up off the field. I mean, that's something we are no matter what you do, you're always a teacher and a role model. I was on a podcast, and it was interesting because I didn't realize it was a political podcast, and I'm listening to it as I'm about to go on. There was all this negativity, and when I got on, I said, "We're going to establish some ground rules. The ground rule is this: we're all going to be respectful of one another. We can disagree with one another, but we're not going to be rude to one another." And wouldn't you know it, Karen? For the next hour, the entire show transformed, and everybody was respectful. And I'm like, you know what? See, you just have to establish the rule. And it was fine. And it was great. It was actually probably one of the best things I've ever been on, because I was like, this is great. It was fruitful. And I mean, maybe you don't change other people's minds, but it's important to think and to be considerate of other people, you know, and
Absolutely.
that's something I hope everybody listening right now is, all of us have a voice, all of us have a way to positively contribute to the planet. So I encourage everybody, go out and make a difference, a positive difference.
Well, I think we're going to end on that tone because that's exactly what we need to do. And we'll have you back on. I'm going to start reading all that information that you have out on your website, and encourage our listeners to do the same. So, again, thank you, Danny, and have a great day.
Thanks for all you do, Karen. God bless you.
Bye bye now.